Very pleased to announce our first inaugural XCL Dialogues. This is a session that we've set up which will be ongoing and recurring, and it was really set up to provide unique learning opportunities for students. We're thrilled to have a guest this evening, Tom Wright, renowned author, to talk with us today with our students.
I'm very excited to be the first one to host this, along with Tom. Tom is an acclaimed Wall Street Journal reporter, as you may already know. He has been a reporter for some 20 years, much of that time across Asia. He is the co-author of this Pulitzer Prize nominated book, The Billion-Dollar Whale, along with his co-author, Bradley. Let's start and talk about journalism first. The field of journalism has changed quite a lot. Tell us your view of why your work as a journalist you feel is important today for people to have access to good quality journalism.
I was with the Wall Street Journal for 20 plus years, but I actually left 2 years ago to set up my own company. We're calling it a journalism production studio. So we're still doing journalism. And one of the most amazing things about the Journal is it's very, very careful about what it publishes. Publications are becoming a lot closer to editorial in the news pages. I don't think readers are really that interested in editorializing. They want you to tell them something new about something they don't know. And that takes hard work. And it also takes a lot of investment from a newspaper owner, because they have to, to give an investigative journalist the time to go and do the reporting on a story, that costs a lot of money. The most important thing is you have a corporate culture inside each publication with editors who adhere to very high standards and train the staff in how to, follow those standards. That's the way that journalism remains powerful and strong.
Let's look at technology, because technology can be very much a force for good in investigative reporting, looking at data, looking at information. Data journalism is something that some of the students here might actually be interested in studying at some point or have been studying already. But also the advent of AI and AI writers. Reuters, all the major business news organizations have been using AI writers to write hundreds of stories a day, financial reports and things like that, for many years already. So do we run a risk of getting away from the good hard work of real humans, or is the opposite side of that argument, AI can be much more effective in scraping the internet for good data and write good stories itself?
I was the Asia economics editor for a while at the Journal, and we tried to do this. We tried to sort of take data sets and analyze them with programming. We had some programmers in the office. One thing we tried to do was show that front running was happening on the Hong Kong stock market. We tried to do that, and it wasn't successful at all, because journalism isn't a very complicated profession. You have to get to know people, be a good networker, and then use your network to find out what's going on. And one of the best ways to break news is to get whistleblowers to come to you with their information. So with the 1MDB fraud, we were able to break it because somebody in the Malaysian government came to us and said, look, we're really worried about what Prime Minister Najib Razak is doing in our country, which is stealing billions of dollars. And so here's his bank account, and here's his credit card statements, and here's all this information. And so it's that human intelligence that you need. And then the second part of the job is knowing how to triangulate information. So if you tell me something, then I can't just print that, right? I need a second source, or I need a... So, we did that a lot in Billion Dollar Whale, where we'd get documents about, somebody's bank account, but then we'd see a name of a company here, and we'd see it in a different document there, and we'd be able to work out. And so that I feel like those two skills, the networking skills, and then the sort of the analytical skills. So for any students who are here, things you learn in school here, how to write essays, how to take multiple sources and push them all into one essay, that's what you need to do to be a really good journalist. The transferable skills, it doesn't matter whether you're writing a history essay or a social science project or whatever it is, those are the same skills you're going to need to be a good journalist.
When did you first decide that journalism was going to be your career?
If I look back on when I was at school, what was the moment where I felt journalism was something I was really interested in was in 1984, so I was born in 1974. In 1984, there was a film called The Killing Fields about a famous New York Times journalist who had been involved in covering Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge genocide in 1975 in the second half of the 1970s. I loved it, and I was fascinated by this place that I hadn't heard of. There were lots of journalism films in the 80s, right? There was the one with Mel Gibson about Indonesia.
That was a fantastic book, The Year of Living Dangerously.
The Year of Living Dangerously.
Yeah.
And then I ended up in Indonesia on a gap year between high school and university, and fell in love with Indonesia, learned to speak Indonesian, and then I got internships at Reuters.
When you look forward to how journalism needs to evolve, as you get up every day to cover stories, what excites you about the evolution of journalism, of your particular brand, of what you're doing with Project Brazen?
There are so many good stories. A good journalist, or at least a hardworking journalist, and a mediocre one is that I used to have staff at the Journal. Some of the reporters would say, "Oh well, it's hard to get stories. There's nothing happening." There's always something happening. It's just, how do you find it? So what excites me is that, we're hearing this talking to Hollywood executives. People want true stories these days. If you look on Netflix, how many things you see there are based on reality. There's a Charles Sobhraj thing on Netflix now about Charles Sobhraj, who preyed on backpackers in Southeast Asia in the 80s. That's based on a real thing, right? So yeah, I think things have just got much more sophisticated. So I think that's what keeps me going. Like, how many great true stories can you find and develop?
Do you feel like you have a calling? Do you feel like you have a mission to expose wrongdoing, to get stories out?
No.
How do you approach that kind of question?
I think I do it like everyone does anything in life. You do it for your personal, professional advancement, maybe glory. A good journalist should be very skeptical about people's personal reasons to do things. So, no, I don't do it to be a do-gooder at all. I just find it very interesting. And I think, if you can go by the do no evil mantra, that's good enough, right? As a journalist, especially, if you start to think, I want to change that, you become an activist, not a journalist. It's a very complicated story, but the very basic version of it is some governments in the world are like mafia organizations. And Malaysia under Najib was like that. Former Prime Minister, now a convicted felon, Najib Razak. He, although he's out on appeal running around Malaysia, if you can control the finances of a corrupt nation like Malaysia or Russia or a nation like you could put into that bucket, you can become extremely rich extremely quickly. A lot of Middle Eastern countries fall into this as well. Jolo was this very young, very ambitious Malaysian-Chinese guy from Penang who realized that dynamic. And he befriended Najib Razak through Najib Razak's stepson, Riza Aziz, who he knew from London. And he befriended the similar types of people in the Middle East. And he was able to use his connections in the Middle East and in Malaysia to get himself involved in these deals where they would just move government money, very simply, from the Middle East to Malaysia. And Jolo would take a cut. And he actually, before this scandal that we recount in the book, he had already taken $100 million doing that, illegally, taking his cut from these flows of money between countries. This is illegal because this is money that should be going into development to make Malaysia a better place, to make Middle Eastern countries a better place. The problem we have in the financial world is that the regulators are paid by the banks. So the auditors who are supposed to go in and check there's no financial shenanigans are paid by the companies. Deloitte Touche and KPMG and all these companies that did work for 1MDB were paid by 1MDB. So nobody caught the financial crime. Same thing for Goldman. The compliance people, I've seen the emails, the compliance people in Goldman who are supposed to say, hey, let's not do this business looks really shady, are finding ways to make the business happen. And it's very simple. Their bonuses,
because they know they're going to make money off it if they approve these things.
People made life-changing amounts of money on this. So the point is, white-collar crime, it's often very easy to say there's no victim in white-collar crime, right? And if I murder Glenn now, then there's an obvious victim.
Yeah.
Your family, you're dead, your family is upset. In white-collar crime, we had this trouble with the book. Like, how do you personify a victim of white-collar crime? It's a poor Malaysian who doesn't have a school. There's no direct correlation between this crime and that person, and not having something is very hard to show as well.
Thank you, Tom, for that overview of what's going on. We have a section now of who, what, where, when, why, and how, which are the typical questions that journalists will ask in any story. But now it's your turn to ask those questions.
I'm Elizabeth, and I'm currently in grade 12, originally from Lithuania.
Okay.
And I'm here from The Vantage Point, which is our school magazine here. The first who question that we all collectively came up with was, as young writers, we're still developing our writing style. And over your many years of experience in journalism and writing, who have you turned to for guidance and direction? Someone who influenced you?
So I was very lucky to work for a guy called Paul Beckett, and I worked for him for 10 years. Paul is the Washington bureau chief now for the Wall Street Journal, which is obviously a very important job and a very difficult job, right? Especially during the Trump administration. He was very important to me because, first of all, he taught me a lot about the things we've talked about today. How do you decide what you write about? How do you hold powerful people to account? But ultimately, I learned from him that we're here to do a job, which is remaining independent.
My name is Federica. I'm from Italy, grade 12 now. So my question is, so at the time of Joe Loeb, like we said before, Najib Razak was the prime minister with the UMNO party. My understanding of the political situation of Malaysia now is that this party is trying again to run in the election, and it seems to be popular again. So what do you think about this current political situation? What impact do you think your book had on the Malaysian people, as well as people in general, like on understanding corruption and how it could go unnoticed, especially if you don't have inside knowledge?
The Muhyiddin, the prime minister now, he obviously came from UMNO.
Right.
And I think you get, in a lot of countries, corrupt countries, you get these rainbow coalitions where people just come in and out of government the whole time. You get it in Indonesia a lot as well. When UMNO lost power, when Najib was kicked out, that was the first time UMNO had ever lost power since Malaysia became an independent country in 1957. They're not back in power, but there's all this talk that they could be. I think part of the reason that they were in power for so long is because of the system in Malaysia where Malays are given jobs and handouts and this kind of thing, and that then leads them to vote, people in rural areas to vote for them. And the UMNO's undoing partly was 1MDB, the fraud was so huge, and partly was the fact that there are more urban voters these days. And urban voters are more sophisticated. They don't think, I'll vote for you just because I get a handout. I'm not a Malaysian politics expert, but definitely in terms of what impact did 1MDB have on the voters, I think huge. We were very lucky with the timing of the book because, first of all, it would never have sold in Malaysia if Najib had been in power. They would have just found a way to ban it. Instead, he lost power, and then the book came out quite soon after.
I'm Jessica, I'm 14, I'm from California. My question is, where do you think Joe Loeb is now?
Singapore's actually got an open arrest warrant out for him, as well as Malaysia and the US. He's in China. We sort of last knew precisely where he was in late 2019, so it's pretty out of date now. And that was he was in Macau.
When did you first realize that you would have to face a lot of challenges to become a journalist, and did that influence your desire to still pursue your career as a journalist? When
I first got my first journalism job was in 1996 in Jakarta with Reuters, and I was an intern there. I mean, you sometimes sit and look at the screen and you're like, well, that's an empty screen, right? And that's when I first realized how difficult it is, because you've got to, it's very, very difficult at the beginning because you have to sort of create something off an empty page. And the way I've always done it, including up till now, is just to copy people. Like, the best way to learn is to copy, read widely. When I was younger, I'd read The New Yorker, and I always thought that was like the ultimate best journalism, and I would try to copy how they did it, where did things fit, how did they tell stories.
Of the multitude of fraud and corruption occurrences, you chose to pick the one about Joe Loeb. There are so many stories happening in the world right now, but why this one specific story?
Why Joe Loeb? Why 1MDB?
The story was actually broken by the Sarawak Report, which is this website run by Claire Rucastle Brown. So at the Journal, we were trying to find ways to write about this story because we realized how big it was. Journalism is always a combination of hard work and then luck. So we did this front page story about the fraud, but it was a very specific small part of the fraud at a very specific time when someone in the Malaysian government wanted to leak all of Najib's bank records. They decided to leak it to me because they'd seen that article, and then they were like, okay, well, this is the right place for us. These guys are on this story. You don't want to get caught by stasis in journalism. You need to write something, even if it's not the best story, because you're never going to write the definitive story about something complex in your first story. You need to just do something, and then you build sources from that, then people start talking to you, and then you build it up like a brick wall. How do you choose what you focus on, right, in general? You don't want to do stuff as a journalist that's just worthy, because it's boring. Like corruption without the Hollywood side and all this isn't that interesting. And we're not regulators. We're also supposed to entertain, right? There are people doing more advocacy journalism, which is like, Panama Papers, for example, right? It wasn't very fun to read the coverage of the Panama Papers because it was very, it was almost doing a public service. Whereas for me, I've always been more interested in, well, I want to tell a story. Jolo was a great story. And now we're working on, different great characters. So that's how I would choose it, a great story and a meaningful subject matter.
How are you going to choose the projects? Are they going to fall into your lap again, or are you going to go and search them out to actually make them into your project? Maybe
we're at an advantage now versus starting off in journalism because we've got a reputation and a brand that means people come to us with stories now, right? So it does get easier, to be honest. And so
when you win international awards for investigative reporting,
it helps.
It helps a lot.
This is the other thing about journalists. You just become a networker, and you try to know as many people as possible, keep their business cards. And this guy came back into Bradley's life. Now he's on the run from the FBI. And Bradley knew him when he was a war reporter in Libya a decade ago. Again, it's not really seeking out. Maybe that's again luck. But you also sort of make your own luck because Bradley is an amazing reporter, right? And just knows interesting people. So,
but success leads to success when it comes to journalists who are operating on a very high level that have had, people read your stories, they think, hey, they're well researched and well written, and they sound honestly written. That then leads somebody who might have information that might incriminate somebody to want to come to you versus somebody they don't know.
Maybe, yeah, I think that's right. But also you have to continue to work very, very hard because journalism is like a really, you'll be proven to be naked if you write a nonsense story that's all wrong, right? And then your reputation's gone.
What's one piece of advice you can give them, maybe in addition to finding a good mentor, that they can either figure out if this is a career that they want for themselves, or if they know it's already a career they want, how they can jump right into it and learn more about it?
Write to lots of organizations, get yourself an internship, and then when you turn up at the internship, be humble and extremely, extremely hardworking. Soak up things like a sponge. Read widely. Read. Find journalists. If you don't have a mentor, find journalists in magazines or in newspapers that you like, and re-engineer what they do. Figure out what they're doing. And like at the Journal, the best reporters, young reporters we had, were the ones who would read the paper. There were some reporters who didn't read the paper. Read books by journalists. How do they structure it? And just read widely and be very curious as well. Just be curious about the world.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for joining us today here in Singapore, and those of you who are online around the world for this inaugural XCL Dialogues. Tom Wright, thank you for being with us today and sharing your experience.
Thank you.